George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Well, we've got a topic that's really good. I think it's going to surprise you. I think you're going to be really surprised about this. Here's what's going on. The FDA has proposed a ban on the sale of menthol flavored cigarettes, right? They proposed that ban. Seems like a good thing, right? The reason why they're doing this, they say, is to curb smoking, to limit its impact on communities, and to begin to help with the smoking cessation. I mean, that's what the goal of this program. There's also the fact that menthol flavored cigarettes, as studies have shown, are mostly popular within the African American community. The other thought is that these cigarettes, or this flavor of cigarettes, is more addictive, even though African Americans don't smoke as much. At least that's what we have come to believe. So why is it that there are some in this on this call in particular that want the FDA to pump its brakes? Hold up. The ACLU says this particular ban could have a negative impact on the very communities that are purported to be helped. So with that, let's meet our distinguished panel, who is here to offer their perspective and their opinion. All right, so who do we have in the building, as they say? Joining us, first of all, is retired Deputy Inspector Corey PEGUES of the NYPD, a Queens, New York native. He's a retired NYPD Deputy Inspector, as well as author, motivational speaker, community leader, and expert on police-related topics. After graduating high school, he enlisted in the United States Army, where he served almost 4 years as a medical specialist. After his honorable discharge from the Army, he enlisted in the New York State National Guard, where he spent the next 14 years of his military career. Corey entered the New York City Police Academy in January 1992, and after graduation, he was assigned to the 114th Precinct, located in Astoria, Queens. He was promoted to the rank of Sergeant 5.5 years later, and Corey was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant in 2002. He is our expert that's here today. There's a lot of other good stuff that he's done, but I'm going to stop right there and introduce our next panelist. We're pleased to be joined now, of course, by Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., of course, the civil rights leader, president and CEO of the National Newspapers Publishers Association. Dr. Chavis was an assistant in his youth to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who inspired him to work in the civil rights movement. And at the age of 24, Dr. Chavis rose to international prominence in 1971 as the leader of the Wilmington 10 civil rights activists who were convicted with committing arson. As the oldest of 10, Dr. Chavis received the longest sentence. Their convictions and sentences were appealed, and in 1980, all 10 were freed due to prosecutorial misconduct. Dr. Chavis returned to graduate school in the field of civil rights and became a vice president of the National Council of Churches. The board of the NAACP elected Dr. Chavis as the executive director of America's oldest civil rights organization, and he later served as the national director of the Million Man March and the founder and CEO of the National African American Leadership Summit. Dr. Chavis is the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, an African American organization with focuses on supporting and advocating for publishers of the nation's more than 230 Black newspapers. Wayne Harris is a deputy chief, retired of the Rochester Police Department. He served over 30 years with the Rochester, New York Police Department, and he's the current board chair of the Law Enforcement Partnership, which is LEAP or LEAP, and he's the former national executive board member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, or NOBLE. He's the vice president of the board of directors of the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence and a nationally recognized expert on policing in America. Deputy Chief Harris holds instructor certification in general topics, firearms, implicit bias, and procedural justice, and holds a Bachelor of Science degree from organizational management, a certificate in criminal justice education, and is a graduate of the 244th session of the FBI National Academy. And Elliot Boyce is a native New Yorker and began his distinguished 33-year career with the New York State Police in 1987. In 1996, he was appointed to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation as an investigator, where he was assigned to the Community Narcotics Enforcement Team, working multiple level narcotics cases throughout much of his central, southern, and western New York areas. In 98, Boyce was cross-designated a U.S. Customs officer by the U.S. Department of Treasury. And in 99, he completed the New York State Police Basic Hate Bias Criminal Investigation School to become a bias crimes investigator. So right now, he's a senior investigator with the New York State Police, and also he also does the EAP training as well. He's received let me get his degrees in here. He's got a master's in criminal justice from the School of Criminal Justice at the State University of New York in Albany, and an MPA, Master's of Public Administration at Marist College. And in 2021, he obtained a Diversity and Inclusion Certificate from Cornell University. And we also have from the National Latino Officers Association, Anthony Miranda. Anthony, tell us a little about yourself.
And I am also a law enforcement expert, retired NYPD sergeant for over 20 years. I was the chief of police and director of security for the Administration of Children's Services for the city. I also ran the regional director for the shelters run by the city of New York, privately run shelters. I have my degrees from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My master's degree is from Monroe College, and I'm working toward right now. I directed as a peace officers training, supervised safe crisis management performance, preventing and managing crisis situations, understanding and doing implicit bias, mandated reporter training. So again, you have a panel of well-rounded individuals. I have my degrees. We have our expertise. We've been doing this for well over 40 years. I was the founder of the National Latino Officers Association, and we continue. We started in New York. We're a national organization across the United States and internationally organizing as well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right, and just so y'all know that we have some other folks in the room. You're not seeing her, but we are. You're not seeing her. I'm not seeing her, and we're good with that. Just so you know, we've got some other folk who are showing up in your videos, even though they're not on the program tonight. Okay, so the NAACP says that the tobacco industry has been targeting the African-American community, and they are excited, if you will, if that's the language I could use, about this idea of banning menthol cigarettes because of the disparate impact that it has on the community. Dr. Chavis, you were formerly head of the NAACP. You're not siding with them on this one. Why?
Well, I'm still a life member of the NAACP, very proud, and I work very closely with the national office of the NAACP today. It's our oldest and strongest civil rights organization, so I remain strong and supportive. But there's a difference of opinion on this particular ban. Certainly, all of us want to see a reduction of smoking among African Americans. But the problem with this ban, this is racial profiling par excellence. This is targeting Black people. Remember what happened to Eric Garner? Why was Eric Garner choked to death in New York? He was selling loose cigarettes. He should be alive. He should be alive today. If you allow this ban that targets what, in other words, why didn't the FDA ban all cigarettes? Why?
Yeah.
If you want to, so why do you ban a product that it is specifically used by the majority of African Americans to smoke? There's something wrong with the thinking there. You know, either you're going to have a ban that applies to all people without race discrimination, or you're going to, what they did, they chose a racial discriminatory, a racially targeted ban that is going to cause more interactions between African Americans and law enforcement. And that's why I'm so glad, Brother Kirkpatrick, to join my distinguished law enforcement people, so you can hear from them. Yeah. These are Black experts in law enforcement. And so what the FDA should have done, they should have had a hearing. They should have come and hear from Black law enforcement before making such a ban, because they could have been better informed. And certainly, we intend to do a tour. I'm speaking at Freedom Fund Donors all the time for the NAACP right now. And I'm going to raise this issue, you know, because I want all of us to be informed. That's why your radio program, Brother Kirkpatrick, is so important, that people hear the whole truth, not part of a truth. And right now, people are kind of being ecstatic about a half truth that's going to wind up hurting Black people. I don't want to see any more. Why do we want to put another something in the toolkit that gets Black people targeted, that gets Black people racially profiled? This is another stop and frisk tech.
But I hear that, but isn't the argument about isn't the FDA ban about, in their view and in the NAACP's view, trying to save lives because we're adversely impacted from a health perspective we're adversely impacted. So how do you answer those questions? Because I think those are
smokers, because the reason, well, here's the answer. All smokers are adversely impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is to where you start. If your point of departure is as a health organization, then you have to protect the health of all people. This is not about protecting African-American health. This is about targeting African-Americans for specific law enforcement of this ban. And what is going to happen is it's going to set up a lot of illegal activity. It's going to push people on the ground. You think people are going to stop smoking menthol because they banned it? That's just like doing prohibition. They said it's illegal to buy alcohol. They went out and made their own alcohol. Now what's going to happen? People are going to start making their own menthol to add it to cigarettes. Why didn't they ban Marlboro? Why didn't they ban Camel? Because the white community would not allow it. But Black folks, they think that we're weak. They think we're not going to speak up on this. We are going to speak up on this because it is racially discriminatory, Brother Patrick. That's why we're against it.
Well, but it seems like you're pro-smoking, and I know that.
I'm not. I don't smoke.
Okay, but that's. I mean, it feels like
what I'm pro against police brutality. I'm pro against racial profiling. I'm pro against anything that targets my people without targeting all other people's. There's something wrong with that. You know, this is like saying that think of menthol as a rope.
Right.
We don't want African Americans hung with a menthol rope, but you can hang them with other kind of rope. No, if you're going to ban something, you ban it for all people without racially discriminatory practices. That's the problem. Right now, you're going to enforce something that's targeted to Black people. This is like targeting people for wearing their pants slack. You know, I wear my pants up. I don't, but against people being targeted because they wear their pants slack. So I'm saying it's the culture. You have to ask, why do Black people prefer menthol other than other flavors, those who smoke? It has nothing to do with health. It's a cultural standard. You know, it's just like going to Jamaica and saying, we're going to ban hemp.
So is that like, so let's put it in, is that like Newports?
It's not going to happen.
Is that like, menthol. Is that like smoking Newports and Cools? Is those
yes.
How did I know, right? Newports and Cool.
Because those cigarettes that are preferenced by those who smoke. We're not promoting smoking. I'm glad you asked that question. I do not smoke. No one in my family smokes. The reason why I'm involved in this civil rights perspective, my job is to protect my people from harm. And I see harm on the horizon, Brother compatriots. And somebody better say something about this before this is finally passed.
Well, let's get the law enforcement perspective. Corey, let me start with you. And so from your perspective, this ban would criminalize the sale of menthol products, if or even on the underground, which would create another opportunity for law enforcement interaction within the community. But the FDA is saying, nah, we don't know how that's going to be enforced. So how do we square those two things?
Yeah, so first, let me just put this disclaimer out there that none of us smoke. None of your panelists, none of us smoke. And I'm glad you brought that up because it almost seems like we're on a soapbox telling people to smoke, but that's not the case.
Yeah, it does feel like that. Yeah,
it does. We get that. We all know that. And obviously, we actually are, if you really look at it, telling people to smoke. If you want to smoke, if white people want to smoke, if Asian people want to smoke, Black people should be able to smoke. If you're 21 years and older, we should be able to do pretty much what we want to. We can't let the government, one of the things, because you have to understand this. Addiction is only 3 ways you can help with addiction: treatment, counseling, and education. Okay? And you can't, I could take my law enforcement hat off for just as a Black person. Okay. The Black community is a little leery. Do you really think now the government cares about our health? Because, you know, we could just go back 30 years to this thing called the crack era. And we saw what the government did with the crack era. They actually threw a bunch of crack in our communities, and we're still paying for that today. So they can't bamboozle us telling us they're thinking about our health. And when you look at it over the last 30 years, smoking has gone down over 30%. So, and you know why it's going down? Because 1998, when they had the master plan signed, the tobacco industry, they took all the, there's no more targeting the black. You remember the Jazz Cool Fest in New Orleans?
Newport Jazz Festival.
No more. All of that's gone. The only time they're doing marketing is at price point. Price point is in the store. So if you go in the store, you'll see, you know, Newports, whatever the price is, but that's only for the competitors. Like the Marlboros would be this much, and even that, it's like 99% of big tobacco don't even do any promotion anymore. And like the doc say, you know, if my mother smoked Newport, I smoke Newport. If my mother smoked Campbell, I'll probably smoke Campbell. So in every different community, whatever the popular smoke is, that's what happens. But you look at, especially under the age of like 19 and under, they're smoking a lot less than the white kids. All right, so we know you can't bamboozle us. And as a law enforcement officer, I know when you give me a tool, we'll use it, we'll pull it out. He talked about Eric Garner. Well, I could bring you to Sandra Bland, who was pulled over for a taillight, refused to put a cigarette out, ended up allegedly killing herself, right? And then the most infamous, famous case recently, George Floyd, allegedly was buying a pack of Newports with a counterfeit fake dollar bill, and end up having a life taken out of him for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So those are just 3 cases that we're talking about. I'm not even talking about Rancho, California, where the 13-year-old was tackled last year with a foot on his neck and almost beat unconscious because he was rolling up a Swisher cigarette, and they did the ban out there in California. So people got to pay attention to what's going on. If you don't keep your eye on the prize, this thing is going to come down. But the law enforcement fear is the underground. It's not even about the smoke, it's the underground. Because Bloods, Crips, Nietas, MS-13, why would you sell 2 vials of crack and you're facing 12 years when you can make $100,000 selling Newports? Go to Virginia, get your Newports, come up here, sell them, and you're only gonna have a $1,500 fine. It doesn't even make sense. You're talking about turf wars. If you think you've seen turf wars, let them put this ban. And I always say, I'm telling everybody around the country where we go, you can put the ban, but you're not gonna stop the smoke. You're not gonna stop it. All you gotta do is look at Massachusetts. They did the ban last year. And you know what they're doing? Now, they lost almost $100 million in tax revenue, right? Smoking has not gone down. In neighboring states like New Hampshire, their revenue has gone through the roof because they're not dealing with that. Connecticut, we was able, some of us already testified in Connecticut, was able to get it off the board in Connecticut. So we've been going around the country talking about this, but the main thing is with criminal justice, reimagining criminal justice reform, defunding the police, why would you want to ban something that's going to get more interaction between the Black and brown community and the police? We don't want any more interactions. I think it's well documented that America is trying to lessen the contact, you know, especially with the menial crimes. So, you know, we're going to have, and Elliot will talk about pretextual stops. I'll leave that for Elliot. All of these things are going to happen. I'm telling you, if we don't stop this now, you got to just really think about it. It sounds nice, ban cigarettes. I'm for it. Ban them. I like Doc says, let's ban every cigarette in America. I don't care. I don't smoke, but I smoke a cigar once in a while, being perfectly transparent, but I don't smoke cigarettes. Ban them. Nobody cares about banning them. But are they going to shut down a multi-billion-dollar industry? No, but they want to shut down the Black and brown community. It doesn't make sense, George. You have to really take a look at it. Why would they do something where 90% of people that smoke menthol are Black and brown? And the studies show, they can't show you studies where our health risk is worse than somebody else that's smoking a non-menthol cigarette. It's all the same. So why would you do this stuff? But the problem is for us is we know as law enforcement officers, now that kid that's smoking a cigarette, we're not gonna know that he's smoking a Newport or a Cool, but that's going to give them a reason to stop him. It ain't even about the cigarette, because you can't get the big fish unless you get the little fish.
Right.
Right. So now we round up all the kids smoking cigarettes. And if the FDA think the Black people have a health problem now, wait till you ban it. And Jamal and Boo Boo going to be making their own menthol cigarettes in the basement and selling them. Our health issues are going to go through the roof, because you're not going to know what you're smoking. At least now we know how much menthol is in the cigarette. Everything is regulated. The biggest drug in America is alcohol, George. You got to know and understand. It's regulated, 21 and older. You can go, you can purchase. Same with cigarettes. There's no difference. So we don't need no help with our health over here in the Black and brown community as far as banning cigarettes, because if you're going to ban them for us, ban them for everybody.
Ban for everybody. So Elliot, what about this idea of pretextual stop? I don't even know what that means. So tell me what your position is as from the New York State Police perspective.
Yeah,
from
well,
your
George,
perspective.
From my perspective, exactly. You know what, George, thanks for having us. But the most important part is, you have to understand this is about a ban of the production of menthol cigarettes, okay, which trickles down. And the other side is not talking about the oversight. You have to understand there has to be oversight when it comes down to any ban. So let's take it from the broad perspective. When you talk about oversight on anything you ban, particularly if it's going to be a federal ban, or even if it's on the state level, it goes two ways. It either goes federal or it goes state. Now, from a federal standpoint, the people that will regulate or enforce or look into any type of interaction pertaining to cigarettes would be ATF, alcohol and tobacco, firearms. All right. So if you're saying it's a ban and there's no enforcement, say on the state level, if it happens, it's the same thing. So if it happens on the state level, only thing that can happen is either the health department or the state police will have interaction, just like during COVID-19, state police were at the airports. Then after the state police went to the military, someone has to regulate it, okay? So at some point, our entrepreneurs on the street are going to realize if you ban it, they'll have the opportunity to make money, because one of the things about street entrepreneurs, our drug dealers, they understand time, money, and weight. How much weight will give them how much time incarcerated. And as Corey said, if there's only going to be a fine, there's going to be street wars to deal with this. So when it comes down, when you start talking about the pretext stops, you start talking about the enforcement of it, the only avenue we have, because on the street level, once the drug dealers and once the cartels start getting involved with it, it has to be a federal sanction. That federal sanction looks like the curse word of Syracuse, RICO. Because the only way you can enforce it, being that it's going to be a ban, is an ongoing enterprise, a conspiracy. And that's the only way you can enforce it. So that's on the federal level. How that looks for us in Syracuse and Central New York, it looks like multiple agencies getting together for another curse word, task force. Task force are basically police agencies put together with multiple agencies under the wing of the feds, basically to enforce problems in the community. So even though the people on the other side are saying that NAACP said there's no way this is going to impact us, anything that's banned requires oversight. Oversight means laws and enforcement. Someone has to enforce it. So please don't be confused. The other thing that they said, which was interesting, I found in the news just today, was they said that the number one cause of death for African Americans is heart disease. Well, I was looking at some of the statistics from back in 2017, and I really want to see 2020. What the statistics are showing us is they're showing us for the age range from 44 to 60, the number one cause of death is heart disease.
Right.
The number one cause of death from age 1 to 19, 20 to 24 for African American males is homicide. Yep. Now we go to ban cigarettes, create more entrepreneurship, in a sense, an illegal trade of menthol cigarettes, and that's going to be an issue.
But obviously smoking is also a cause of heart disease. So there's a
put it out there.
I'm I'm still struggling with this idea that how do you balance? We want healthier outcomes for our communities, right? Yeah. We know that Black folk have disparate health outcomes all across the board. Shouldn't we be arguing for healthier outcomes across the board as opposed to advocating for something that, even though we don't do it, still has an adverse health outcome. That's the game I'm playing in my head.
Hold on, Corey.
We want-
What we're advocating for is this. If you're going to put a ban, not to ban it, but use the resources for education, treatment, and counseling, that makes more sense. Okay, so even though we sit on this phone, and like Corey said, I don't smoke, and I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP also. But the thing is, when you ban something, you create oversight. When you ban something as oversight on Black and brown people, specifically based on the way the ban is written, it is targeting our culture alone. So wouldn't it make more sense, instead of banning it, to create and request and demand funding for education, treatment, and counseling? It's just like this. We know if you go to our community, the number one thing that's really affecting most of our African-American people is diabetes. We all know, a lot of people, particularly in those age groups, know that they shouldn't have that piece of cake at night. They will have that piece of cake and take their medicine.
Right.
But what you gotta understand is no one's banning cake and M&Ms and any kind of sweets. So it's the same thing. It's a health issue that you cannot push into the guidelines or into the framework of banning something, making it unlawful. Argue health. If it's about health, make it health for everybody. If it's about a ban, make it a ban for everyone. But when you make it specifically for one person, it's just like when they talked about crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Crack cocaine in our communities got you a sentence for 25 years. In a different community on Wall Street got you 5 years, or maybe probation.
You mean white community?
In white communities, correct.
Okay.
Or those middle class affluent individuals that utilize coke. Problem is, you can't make crack cocaine without coke. So why not punish the ingredient higher than the product? Okay. So when you start talking about banning, you got to understand the better way to go is, and I'm not an advocate for smoking. It's got to go on record. Don't smoke. Don't support smoking. My grandmother and grandfather passed away from cancer. But I also know when I tried to steal or take grandma's cigarettes, the last thing that came down, that wasn't happening. So what we need to understand is people will smoke. This is not going to stop it. How you stop it is you take away the ability for oversight. And what you do is you create programs for treatment. Treatment, education, and counseling is what works. Anything else is just really gonna have a dramatic impact. And on a state level, particularly in New York State, you're gonna have a problem enforcing that anyway, because Native Americans, sovereign land, have the ability to still sell cigarettes.
Right.
So it's gonna be ineffective policies that just really don't benefit anyone.
I mean, and we talked about this in Albany, for example, the group there in Albany County, they're heavily in favor of this menthol ban. Corey, you were going to say something. I'll get Anthony, and then I'll go to Wayne. Were you going to say something? Are you good?
I was going to say something.
Dr. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, just to segue what our distinguished police official just said. Just 3 weeks ago, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that monitors the health of Americans, they concluded for the first time in history that systemic racism is a public health hazard for people of color. All right, now listen to that very carefully, Joe.
I'm listening. Okay.
Systemic racism is a public health hazard for people. The FDA's proposed ban is systemic racism because it targets a racial group. And we're going to try to put a federal guideline on it. So you can't say you're for public health and then engage in a systemic racism public policy, because that is going to put people of color at a health risk when it comes to interaction with law enforcement.
All right, so let me flip.
So I want to make sure that you understand that for the people who say, oh, this is about health. All right. What about Eric Garner's health? What about Sandra Bland's health?
I'm with you.
What about the Their Lives Matter?
Say their names. But let me ask you this. So I want to ask a different question. Maybe it's not the right question, but you'll help me. You'll clarify.
That's why we having the program.
So I'm going to flip it to COVID-19 and the vaccines, right? So we know that Black folk were disparately. My mother died from COVID. And we know that Black folk were impacted in a disparate manner for COVID. When the vaccine came, we were also reluctant for a lot of reasons historically to even get the vaccine. But then once we wanted to get the vaccine, and we were our community was highly impacted because of a lot of comorbidities, right? But then when they said, oh, we want to target the African American community so that they could, because they're at highest risk, we want to target this community so that they have access to the vaccine, whether they decide to do it or not. Okay. So what's the difference between saying that and saying we want to ban menthol cigarettes? How does that?
The difference is you're not saying to one cultural racial group that you can't get the vaccine because of your cultural preferences. That's the difference. And African Americans are not targeted. And under the proposed ban, if you know already, the statistics show you have data. It's supposed to be, public policy is supposed to be driven by data.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that 100 times. All right. Well, the data shows that African Americans and Latinos disproportionately prefer those who smoke menthol.
Right.
So wouldn't it be more advisable, Corey's original point, for the FDA to implement policies to educate African Americans and Latinos of the dangers of all smoking, not just menthol.
Mm-hmm.
But you put a ban on it, you're going to put more African Americans, more Latino Americans, George, in harm's way. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Mm.
Yeah, and George, with the country moving at 13 states are online to legalize marijuana, they're already legalized. So you're telling me that my 21-year-old son, because New York State just went legal a few weeks ago.
Right.
My 21-year-old son can smoke marijuana, but Nana, who's 80 and been smoking for 60 years, can't have a cigarette. It absolutely makes no sense, George. It doesn't make sense. You can't be saying let's legalize marijuana, but let's get rid of something that has been regulated for over 100 years. It doesn't make sense.
And before you move on to the next two, just so you understand what that looks like from a police standpoint is, before if you stopped the police, you stopped a car going down a highway and you roll down the window and you're like, woo, weed, I get to search the car, right? Because you had weed. It was probable cause to search the vehicle. Weed, marijuana now is going to be legal. Now what happens, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a proponent of the fact that we have a lot of good police officers out there. I say the majority, but unfortunately, we have some bad ones that we would like to get rid of. Now, what it used to be, when marijuana used to be the buzzword for stopping and going to the next level, now it's going to be cigarette smoke. Could you imagine the conversations going to be happening on the side of the road when someone says, well, what kind of cigarettes are you smoking? The number one cause of most of the deaths that we talk about happening, occurring around the country, are not as it relates to violent crimes. There are incidents that are relating to non-violent crimes, vehicle and traffic stops, individuals losing their lives. Selling loose cigarettes was a non-violent crime, losing their lives. In New York State, if you had a counterfeit $20 bill, as a police officer, we take it and we send it to the Treasury and nothing happens. You're just out $20, non-violent crime. So what happens is when you create this ban is now going to be these interactions are going to be on the same level as interactions of violations, which we've known over history proven have been bad, particularly for African-American men. So that's the real concern. This is what it puts in hand when you create a ban and you create oversight. Oversight creates opportunity for people to do what the heck they want to do.
Anthony, let me get you in here, and then Wayne will go to you with the presentation. Anthony, what's your take on all of this? Obviously, you're in support of this movement not to ban it. But let me ask you the question I would have asked Elliot, and that's this: it's not even clear whether police would even have to enforce this. So, what do you say to that?
They're proposing a ban, and there's no agency that currently has oversight that has the ability for enforcement. The default for that situation is always moved to local police departments to be enforcing. How else are you going to enforce the ban? Having the ban and not having an enforcement mechanism doesn't make any sense. But again, it sounds politically correct when you have all these politicians talking about health, and it sounds correct. good intentions with bad consequences, right? So they're worried about running for office, which means, oh, we're pro-health. And they're not talking about the consequences. That's why we have to take the conversation away from being a political conversation and say that we need to have common sense conversation about what the true implications are. Law enforcement officers know that people of color like us who come from our communities, we understand what enforcement looks like in our areas. It is entirely different than other white communities. So if we're not proactive in this process, then they're going to say, oh, we never knew that this would end up with more African Americans and Latinos getting arrested, because you don't get arrested for the cigarettes per se. You get arrested for the disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, obstructing governmental administration. Why? Because when somebody stops you and asking you, what are you smoking? And somebody tells the officer, shut up or get out of my face or I ain't talking to you, or tries to walk away, they're going to get grabbed right away, and that turns into an entirely situation. So you won't get it on the record that it's a case about cigarettes. What you'll get on the record is that somehow they assaulted the police officer or resisted the conversation. That's what we're trying to bring attention to. It cannot be a politically motivated for people to get reelected on. We're pro-health. Look at us, we took a stand. But meanwhile, they get elected, and then 6 months later now, the enforcement comes to be an issue. How are you going to force it in stores? How are you going to force it on the corners? What does that look like? Because a drug deal and a cigarette deal look exactly the same. When they're going to pop open the trunks of cars and start selling cigarettes, and that's going to cause what? Officers to respond. People in the community or in the malls are going to start complaining about suspicious vehicles, transactions happening in the back of the car. And then what does that respond? Officers are responding again. So we know that it's going to lead to that confrontation that's going to cost us more than they want to tell us about. So we're waking the community up and waking up our elected officials, especially good intentioned, people who have good intentions. Well, it's a health issue. No, health issue means let's treat them, let's give them the resources, let's give them the options and the education. That is a health crisis that we need to address. We do not make it a situation that ultimately by default or directly will fall into any type of law enforcement community, because somebody will be involved in it. And to get the ultimate illegal sales, you have to have a transaction. And in order to have a transaction, you have to stop people in the street. Now, those are our stores. And think about the other consequences of the stores, the local bodegas, right? People don't necessarily just come in to buy cigarettes. They come in, they buy cigarettes, they buy milk, they buy bread. It's a source of revenue to local stores in our community. Well, now that's a tremendous loss of revenue that they're going to have. And then eventually we'll lose the bodegas again, right? And then we won't have that local access to the resources that we need. So there are long-term implications: education, treatment, right? These are the things that we need to do, which have been effective.
I'm hearing you say that, essentially, this ban has the potential to increase interactions with police and communities of color, and we've seen the consequences of this increased interaction. Is that what I'm hearing you say? And that this is part of that? Okay.
Absolutely. So think about it. We go into certain neighborhoods and we find 10 liquor stores on the corner, all right? Or bodegas on every third corner. There's a bodega. You know that at some point it's not feasible to have these things, but that's what they allowed to happen in our communities, right? And now you're going to have a cigarette ban. It's going to be sold on the street. We are no longer going to be in a control method to say that kids have to be 21 to buy, right? Because now they're going to make the money on the street corner. That's going to be the young teenager buying.
Or they'll go to the nations. In our area, we have, obviously upstate New York, we have nations, and I don't know if that would impact their.
Absolutely. They'll go buy where it's still legal, and they'll still bring it in. And if they can't go buy it and buy it from somebody else, they will start manufacturing their own, which then we lose, again, control. This is a controlled industry right now. It is a regulated industry, not only from the manufacturing point, but also from the selling point. We're going to lose that control.
Let me just reintroduce our panel: Dr. Benjamin Chavis, Anthony Miranda, National Latino Officers Association, Elliott Boyce, New York State Police, Wayne Harris, retired, who we're going to meet Wayne in just a second, retired Rochester Police Department, and Corey Pegues, inspector from the New York City Police Department. Okay, Deputy Inspector Corey, did I get that right?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
You. All right, yes, make sure I got that right. Wayne, you wanted to say.
Most of what we needed to talk about has already been said. This is why we've labeled our presentation the unintended consequences of a menthol flavored tobacco ban, because we're not talking about, cigarettes in general. What we're talking about is how this is going to impact the African-American, the Black and brown communities all across the board. And we've seen it in other parts of the country. And, before the program started, George, we were talking about Rochester, New York a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, Rochester, New York has been in the media, national media, for the past couple of weeks, past couple of months, for incidents that have occurred here. And I can tell you that the relationship between the Rochester Police Department and the community here in Rochester has been strained for decades, and it's been strained because of bad policy.
What are those incidents? Can you say what those incidents are, just so people can be Daniel?
All right, well, absolutely. We had Daniel Prude, who was actually involved. He ended up passing away as a result of interaction with the Rochester Police Department, even before George Floyd did. What occurred was that the tape of Mr. Prude's incident did not surface until last August. It created a huge problem here in the community as far as transparency and trust is concerned, because it looked as though the Rochester Police Department and the city of Rochester had held on to that, and they didn't want to share that with the community. We also had the 9-year-old girl who was handcuffed and pepper sprayed and forced into the backseat of a police car. She had happened to witness her mother and father in a domestic altercation. She basically ran from the situation, not wanting to be a part of it anymore. She may have mentioned something about wanting to harm herself. Law enforcement followed her. Once they got up to her, the situation escalated to the point where the girl basically continued to repeat that she just wanted her dad. She just wants her dad. All the while, the officer is putting handcuffs on her, trying to force her into the backseat of a police vehicle, and then ultimately pepper sprayed her in an effort to force her in there. Those situations have created, just an exasperated situation here that was already bad. The relationship between the city of Rochester and the Rochester Police Department has been bad for a while. Case in point, a number of years ago, as we were trying to combat the violence that's occurring here in the city of Rochester, we used something called Project or Operation Cool Down, where we were using the vehicle and traffic law. We talked about pretextual stops. Here's an example of what a pretextual stop looks like. We started using the vehicle and traffic law in an effort to stop individuals that we thought were involved in violent activity or gang activity or drug activity. But we were using things as simple as failure to have a bell on a bicycle as a means for stopping an individual, likely a young man or woman of color riding down the street. Now, George, you're probably about my age, okay? And you've had bicycles all through your life, man. When was the last time you had a bell on your bicycle? You don't even have to answer. I'll tell you. You probably
exactly.
Yeah, you probably never had a bell on your bicycle. But we were stopping individuals for exactly that. And that one program did more to destroy the relationship between the Rochester community and the Rochester Police Department than anything else. And I know that because we actually surveyed the community here and asked them how good the relationship was and what led to it being poor. And more often than not, the answer that we got back was that Operation Cool Down. Bad policy makes for a bad living situation. It makes a community unhealthy. It actually is worse for the police officers involved because it makes their job that much harder. That's what we're talking about here. Now, I'll show you the PowerPoint presentation here in a second, but there's another aspect that we haven't spoken about yet.
Right, and let me just reiterate what we are talking about. We're talking about the proposed ban by the FDA to ban menthol flavored everything as it relates to tobacco products, and the opposition and the support for that. You have the NAACP and other groups who are saying, this is a good thing. You have the law enforcement groups here saying that, and Black and Latino law enforcement officers and the and Dr. Benjamin CHAVIS saying this has unintended consequences on our community, which could likely lead to police community interactions. And we know the history of what those interactions have been, and we have evidence of those.
George, just one fact. the ACLU has come out against the ban.
They have
Because
come
the
out.
ACLU against the ban because they say it's racially discriminatory.
Yes, thank you for adding that. Appreciate that. Yes, they
So
did.
George, and consider this too. Since George Floyd, we have seen our cities burn across the country.
Mhm.
We have seen the relationship between the police and the community destroyed. The community doesn't trust the police. The police are having a hard time trusting the community right now. No one's talking. So what we're trying to avoid is a further aggravation of a situation that has literally burned the United States.
Mhm.
So let's talk about also the, we touched on it in a second, but I want you to know before I show you the PowerPoint presentation, some of the illegal activity that we've spoken about is already occurring.
Mhm.
Chicago actually put together a cigarette within the Chicago Police Department, a squad just to deal with illegal cigarette sales, because gangs were already beginning to figure out that, as Corey said, it's less problematic to sell illegal cigarettes on the street than it is to sell drugs on the street. So this isn't speculation. This is happening. We're trying to make sure it doesn't happen across the board. So let's talk a little bit. Can I share my screen?
Go right ahead. And make sure you narrate it for the non-viewing audience.
Okay. So one of the things we've talked about, hang on, let me adjust my, here we go. One of the things we've talked about is that there's science. One of the things that the proponents of this ban are saying is that science supports the need to ban menthol tobacco products. That is not the truth. We've also heard from them that it's a gateway to either other drugs or further addicting people to nicotine. That's not the truth either. So let's talk about what the truth is. Here are banning menthol unwarranted by the facts. Youth menthol smoking at historic lows and falling. As of 2019, 98% of youth have not smoked, not even a puff of cigarettes or a menthol tobacco. 1.7%.
So what you're saying is, so based on what you're saying, the very evidence that they're suggesting about the increase in menthol consumption within our community, or the fact is we smoke more menthol than anybody else.
So let's be clear. Of those individuals in the Black and brown community that do smoke cigarettes or engage in tobacco products, 98% of them, or about 95% of them, prefer menthol products.
Right.
But the notion that our youth are going to smoke more because of menthol in a cigarette is not true. In fact, our youth are not smoking cigarettes right now.
They're smoking something else, but go ahead.
Let's talk about what they're smoking, because
here's
the statistic.
You gotta
right
understand that most young people want to smoke weed.
There you go. I mean,
here's the statistic.
Right, there it is.
Youth are much more likely to have smoked marijuana than they are to have smoked menthol cigarettes.
But again, Wayne,
but they're not banning marijuana. They're not banning.
They're not banning marijuana. That's right. Yep.
George, why are they banning marijuana? Come on, man.
Because I don't know why they're not banning.
Because we just legalized it.
That's right. That's why.
That's
why.
The question
but somebody's got to ask that question.
The question isn't why they're banning it. The question is why they're legalizing it. And all you got to do is go to Colorado and see the basements that stacked to ceilings with money for legalization of marijuana, because the feds don't want the money, so they got them. They don't want them in the bank. There's so much revenue. We talk about potholes. We talk about education, infrastructure. Listen, this isn't rocket science, Wayne. They need money, legalize marijuana, and it's going to be a tremendous treasure trove of money coming in.
Absolutely.
Well, but by that same notion, though, I mean, they're making money from tobacco too.
Yeah, but
yes,
they're not talking about, but they're not talking about banning cigars.
Truth. Okay.
They're not talking about banning, pipe smokers. They're not going into Wall Street and telling all those white guys that are down there making millions of dollars, moving stocks. that they can't smoke their cigars anymore.
But if you look traditionally, our communities were the ones that were incarcerated for this same marijuana, right? For many years.
For many years.
And then now, who's controlling the industry? And now it's legal. It's not us, right? It's not our people. It's not people of color who are growing it and selling it, who are getting the license, right? And that's a challenge.
George,
But,
perfect example, George, the opioid crisis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right now, I'm glad that America has woke up and see, because all you got to do is go to Netflix and watch that documentary called Crack, and you'll see what crack did to our community. But now America has woken up. The opioid crisis, they say, hey, counseling, education, and treatment. And I'm like, let's clap for them. They finally got it. It is the same thing with crack. That's what they should have done. With smoking, that's what they should do. It's the same thing. So you can't use counseling, education, and treatment for opioids, a white problem, basically, in America. But they want to counseling. They don't want to lock everybody anymore, right? Like they did all the black and brown people in the crack era. They want to give them counseling, education, and treatment. But now they won't put a ban on them.
And so
Tony Miranda hit it out hard.
Yeah.
If you have a ban, the FDA saying the police are not going to be involved, what are you going to do, George, when your block is overrun by gang members selling cigarette packs? Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? You're going to call the police.
It's fascinating, this idea. And what's the name of that? This is a Crack? You said that's the Netflix documentary? Crack. Okay.
Yes, Crack.
So this next slide says that
that's the shameless plug. I'm teaching in it.
Oh, okay, got you. Well, listen, we need to know. We need to know about everything. But so this next slide talks about banning menthol is unwanted by the facts. Say more about that.
Yeah, so this is interesting because not so very long ago, the FDA came out and basically said menthol cigarettes or menthol in cigarettes is not associated with an increase in disease risk to the user compared to non-menthol cigarette smokers. In other words, the FDA looked at this about 12 years ago and said, nope, it's not more addictive, doesn't make you more likely to get heart disease or anything like that. But now they're trying to reverse their position. This right here is a quote from the FDA. So it puts into perspective that this is a political thing. This is not based on science.
Well, so let me go back to Dr. Ben. Why, if you're talking with the NAACP, how come they don't see what you see and you talking to them and y'all in the room together? Why don't they see what you see?
Well, I think some do see what I see.
Okay.
And we're going to keep discussing. We're not going to let up. We're going to continue to have these discussions with the state conference, with local branches. Like I said, Joe, I'm still speaking for Freedom Fund donors all over the country. This coming weekend, I'm going to talk about it because I think we need our people better informed. That's why with these forums and your radio program, George, is so important. We need to keep our people better informed. And I believe that once the NAACP sees the light, they would join the ACLU and other major organizations like the NMPA, which I lead, to oppose the racial profiling, to oppose the racially motivated ban on menthol cigarettes.
So one of the facts, thank you, Dr. Ben, one of the facts that the FDA or the proponents of this ban suggests is that menthol cigarettes are more addictive and harder to quit. You're challenging that, Wayne. Tell me why. Because
the facts don't support it. The FDAs themselves have come out and said it's no more addictive, that it doesn't create a greater risk of heart disease. And our statistics here show African-American menthol smokers were not significantly different from non-menthol smokers in successful cessation. So the science says that just because menthol is in a cigarette does not mean it's harder to quit smoking. Tobacco is tobacco. Nicotine is nicotine. Menthol is not what addicts people to smoking cigarettes. Nicotine is. So to Corey's point, if you're going to ban, if your intention is to to stop people from becoming addicted to cigarette smoking, then ban it all, to include cigars, to include pipe smokers, to include non-mentholated tobacco products.
Yeah. And George, you just, one of the key things too is you can't have policy being created on emotion. You know, when I say emotions, the fact that someone may have lost a loved one to cancer, now we have to create this big policy. You know, it has to be done, thought out, and sat down, and like, you know, the doctor said, you have to have hearings so you hear both sides of it. You know, when you start using things that we kind of glance and blow, what glanced over was advertisement. You're never going to see LeBron James, Michael Jordan, or any of the popular athletes of this era on a cigarette commercial. That has been banned by the federal government. You'll never see it. I think Corey hit it when Corey basically spoke to the fact that he says you only have price point advertisement that's in the stores, and that's it. So when you see the other side's argument, it's always interesting to me because I've searched. You see things like the cool, we talked about it, the cool jazz festival, Billy D. Williams and people in afros. The industry is just like any other industry. They have to promote their product to the best of their ability, but once they get regulated, they have to go from there. We can't keep the same narrative from 30 years ago when it's been regulated. You can't show me these pictures.
But these are their own statistics when they talk about the addictive quality and slower to, where did they get that from? Because that's what they're saying. They're saying that we are more addicted to this menthol and it's harder to quit and harder to, and even though we're not smoking as much. So where they get that?
Who is they? That's not based in science. That's somebody just speculating that it's going to be harder to quit if a cigarette is mentholated.
Or more addictive is what they're saying.
Or even more addictive. That's not based in science. That's speculation.
Well,
that's somebody going, ooh, those menthols, those cools, those Newports, those are successful. Right. Those are popular. They must be more addictive. But there's no science that supports that.
And George, it's people that's basically giving you short information. And like I said earlier, when I talked about age 1 in 19 and 20 to 44, the number one cause of death for Black men is homicide, not heart disease. But when you look at the statistics they give you statistics for the age group of 45 to 60. If you look at that, everyone in America goes, whoa, that's a problem. If you look at all of it, based on age across the board, the concern we should have is a ban, because we're already losing enough, Black men as it pertains to homicide, and you talk about putting them in harm's way.
So here's what the FDA says. Here's their quote: banning menthol, the last allowable flavor in cigarettes, and banning all flavors in cigars will help save lives, particularly among those disproportionately affected by these deadly products. With these actions, the FDA will help significantly reduce youth initiation, increase the chances of smoking cessation amongst current smokers, and address health disparities experienced by communities of color, low-income populations, and LGBTQ+ individuals, all of whom are far more likely to use these tobacco products, says Acting FDA Commissioner Janet Woodcock.
And George, that's their recent quote.
Okay.
But this is a preliminary scientific evaluation of the possible public health effects of menthol versus non-menthol cigarettes, also by the Food and Drug Administration from 2013. What you just quoted is a reversal of the FDA's own position. So there's no science. This is based on politics. This is whoever is whispering in somebody's ear the loudest, getting the FDA to do what they want them to do or say what they want them to say. We're here today to tell you what the truth is.
Yeah, and I'm here to be educated. That's what I'm here. And I just have to ask the questions that John Q. Public wants to know.
Yep. And we want you to.
Yeah, because...
And you're doing a phenomenal job at asking questions. But again, we're not wavering on the fact that what the position is. And you know what? When you're sitting in something that you got to battle and you want to go against the other side, you have to hear the hard questions. You don't want to battle second place. You want to battle first place. Right. So if you're putting us in the battle when you're dealing with first place, we're here for it. But what's really you got to be understandable of is it all circles back to one thing. Everyone is telling us about emotions, the health. The FDA had a really nice quote in this particular situation that you just read to us. What was interesting, they also put the LBQG community into it. How up to date is that information at this point? We want to cover everybody to make sure it's No, we're sensitive. But what you also got to understand is it still goes back to one thing: oversight. And this is our concern. There's no caveat for oversight. You can read every document. I sent you the documents freely. Find something that says, how are they going to handle this? And I will tell you, Corey will mention it also, he's already done it. He's talked to New York City Police Department. They don't want to have anything to do with this. Police chiefs around the country, if you poll them, the last thing they want to do is be dealing with some type of law enforcement that has to do with cigarettes, which creates a task force for it. It's really also an officer safety issue. So when you talk about from a different standpoint, now you put police officers in harm's way for dealing with something that's a person's choice, a grown adult's choice, and their choice is to smoke. If they choose to smoke, that's their choice. You're not going to stop them from it. So no politician should have the right, or political entity should have the right to make somebody's choice by putting the ban and then having to find, and then, if we throw the ban out there, we figure out how to deal with it later. Well, that's dangerous.
It just occurred to me, who wants to say something?
This is Anthony Miranda. We got to separate this conversation, right? Because it gets very convoluted. There are adults and there are children. And if we're talking about the exposure for children in a non-controlled environment, then deregulation and banning doesn't work, right? Because that seems to be the key word. We got to protect our children comes out first. And then that means you need to have the control mechanism and the regulations in place, because that is what the store owners do. They don't sell the cigarettes in the street. They don't allow kids to buy those cigarettes, right? So then that has a purpose. Now we change the conversation to adults who are in their 50s and 60s and are making a conscious decision to exercise their right to smoke that cigarette. And we're telling them, guess what? Because you're African-American or Hispanic, you're not smart enough to make that choice. So we're going to make it for you. And we're going to possibly make it criminal. Okay, think about that 40 or 50-year-old now trying to buy a cigarette on the corner, right? We're now putting them in danger for the robberies. We're putting them in danger for crimes to happen. We're creating the situation that are endangering them more than any cigarette would.
Yeah. The 50 to 60-year-olds not going to the corner. They're sending their grandkid or their granddaughter.
When I was a kid, I went to the store for my aunt and my mother. And
me so too. Everybody else on this call.
You know what I'm saying? So
you go to the store.
I did want to highlight something that I think is significant. And again, I don't have a dog in the fight yet, but the fact that you're all law enforcement, right, talking about this, and African-American, Latino law enforcement officers talking about this and the unintended consequences, I think it's pretty significant, right? Because y'all are inside the game. Y'all know what's up. And so I think in terms of the messenger and being a credible messenger, truth be told, we've got to take notice, at least, because y'all coming out here. I mean, you're retired, except for Elliot, but but coming out here saying, yo, wait, hold up, look at this. I think it bears some significance, and I wanted to just honor that at least.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You had some more stats for me, Wayne.
Yeah, we could get through the slides real quick. This slide here talks about the fact that there was speculation that menthol cigarettes were priced lower to African Americans. This slide here shows that is in fact not the case. Menthol cigarettes were not priced lower, so they were not, more popular with the African American community. We spoke a little bit about this already, about the illicit trade and how this will work. Elliot mentioned that cigarettes are still going to be sold by the Native American nations all across the country. So those individuals that want to sell them illegally will clearly be able to go onto a reservation, pick up 10, 11, 100 cartons, and then go out there and sell those on the streets. That's already occurring. We're seeing that. What we're also seeing, though, is individuals actually trying to mentholate cigarettes themselves through extremely unsafe means. We spoke a little bit about this as well. The Massachusetts ban did not work for them. They lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Who did profit was New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New York.
How many states right now have this ban in effect, this menthol ban?
Corey, you know the answer to that one? Corey, you're muted.
It's a very small number of states, George.
Okay.
Some municipalities. is not
Yeah,
having that.
George came.
So
I'm sorry, I was muted. But yeah, it's
depends-
6 cities
depends on
around the
yeah.
country right now.
6
That's
cities?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
6 cities. It's 6 cities. There's no one state, but there's 6 cities right now.
Okay.
So in the grand scheme of things, we have, hundreds and hundreds of cities.
Right.
There's
And
only
that's why
6.
That's why this discussion in New York is so important, because New York's the trend.
And New York is obviously considering this.
Yeah, New York actually has a bill trying to go through the Senate and also the Assembly. Two separate bills.
Yeah.
New York.
All right. Well, so we
And
need
we have testified. We've testified. I've testified up in Albany County, I think 2 to 3 times. As a matter of fact, last time after I testified and my other partner John Dixon, they tabled it after hearing our, spill on unintended consequences. They was ready to vote right there to put the ban in. But after we testified, they actually was like, wow, we never knew all of this stuff, and they tabled it. And I haven't heard anything since then. This is a very, very serious topic of conversation, Wayne. I want you to spread this message as far as you can, because every Black person in America and Hispanic person needs to know that this is coming down the pipe. And I'm telling you, again, I until I'm blue, you can ban it, but you won't stop the sale. I'm in New York State right now. 50% of cigarettes in New York State sold are illegal already.
already.
Yep.
That's 50%. That's already illegal. So you get that other 50%. I'm telling you, you opening up a can of worms, like Elliot said. It's going to be so much turf gang warfare. Because again, I just can ask you, if you're going to the corner store and everyone you pass it, yo, I got those Newports, yo, I got those Newports, I got those Newports. Then you hear gunshots. Then you're hearing about robberies. Who you eventually gonna call? You're not gonna call the FDA. You're not gonna call a local senator. You're calling the police.
Right.
And when the
And
police get
the
there,
other the other thing too is, like we spoke about, one of the things they've said is that this is going to be up to the health department to enforce.
Mm-hmm.
And Elliot will tell you, surprised he hasn't mentioned it yet, the health department is not staffed high enough to enforce anything like this. So what happens? They develop task force that also include law enforcement. So law enforcement is going to have to deal with it on the street for the illegal sales that's going on out there, and for those stores that still want to sell menthol tobacco products, the health department is going to call for law enforcement as backup.
And just to say one thing, we want to make sure that, especially the elected officials who are proposing this legislation, are about to vote on these things, and saying, we don't want them saying, or we didn't know, right? Because when this happens and our communities are the ones that were suffering, we want to hold people accountable.
Right.
So we don't want to give them the excuse to say, hey, well, we didn't know that this was possible. That's why this conversation is so important, because we're saying it is possible, it is happening, and we can foresee the impact it's going to have on our community. So no one can sit there and say they didn't have the information or that they weren't informed, because we're informing them right now.
that's right.
Right.
So this slide here, we're almost done with the slides. This slide here basically says the same thing that for San Francisco that the Massachusetts slide said.
That the ban did not significantly reduce, it didn't have the intended consequences. It didn't have the.
No,
Right.
it didn't stop people from smoking. All it really for Massachusetts was create a couple of illegal situations where people are going into another state and coming in and bringing cigarettes back, and then put money into the pockets of the states like New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, New York.
And that there was a concern that this would disproportionately affect communities of color. Well, yeah, because that's where most of this quote unquote smoking of menthol flavored products is taking place.
This slide right here speaks about, or actually depicts that 14-year-old boy that Corey mentioned a little bit earlier. He was rolling up a Swisher. This kid probably weighed maybe 100 pounds.
Yeah.
But if you see this video, he was body slammed by this particular police officer for basically rolling up a swisher.
Because it's banned there, Wayne. It's banned.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
here we go. Here's the cowboy cop, young black boy rolling up something. He doesn't know if it's a menthol cigarette, but he's over there with the chip on his shoulder. He's gonna stop this ban.
And so this is and for our audience, this is an officer with a 14-year-old kid, and he's got him pinned to the ground for basically, as you said, rolling up a swisher.
But if you see the video that this picture is associated with, that kid just didn't fall down. That officer he slammed that kid down to the ground.
Pinned down, yes.
And as we're talking about this, keep in mind that Army lieutenant that just got dragged out of his vehicle.
And yes.
That was in uniform.
In his uniform. Yeah.
And again,
George,
George,
we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, nonviolent crimes, violations, crimes in which no matter what happens, no matter what you do, you end up with a piece of paper and you send on your merry way. This should never escalate to the point of someone losing their life.
All right, when
so George, all this is when you hear the term unintended consequences. Everything we've talked about for the last hour gives you the evidence that people who may be well-intentioned, the ones who wanted the ban, they don't understand the consequences of their intentions. What we're bringing to you are the consequences, and we're trying to do it proactively. It's better for us to raise this alarm now, to try to save some lives now, to try to save some young brothers and sisters from being thrown to the ground now. These experienced police officers are giving you nobody in the FDA is listening. Because if the FDA was listening, they would never propose such a devastating ban that's going to have a devastating impact on Black and brown communities.
Well, Elliot, you want to say something?
Just real quick, just so you know, Massachusetts and California do have state bans. Apparently, California is putting together a ballot for the citizens to decide. But there are state bans in Massachusetts and in California. And what's unique about this is some of these Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken, part of their caveat for their ban is if you are caught with interstate transport of cigarettes. So I go to New York and I get 20 packs and I bring them back to Massachusetts. If you get caught, they have the ability to seize your vehicle. Okay, so for illegal transfer. So these are things that also have a greater impact because again, mom, pop, and grandma are not going to get the cigarettes. It's going to be, hey, Elliot, while you're off at school in New York on the way home, stop and bring me 10 cartons of cigarettes. And that puts now, cigarettes, I can do it, puts them in harm's way. I will tell you something about law enforcement. I always say I'm a proud police officer. But at the end of the day, promotion of success in law enforcement is about stats and statistics. You have to show productivity. The more productive you are, the more likely you are to get promoted. And if you're a person that's really proactive, you like to do street interaction, it's gonna go from marijuana to cigarette enforcement because we already know that the cigarettes in your state are illegal. So you gotta have police officers really just trying to be proactive, doing their job, interacting with the citizens. And again, that also creates an unnecessary interaction. And it's going to be with some of our young adults who have no intentions of violating crimes, but just trying to help grandma and grandpa out as they, help them with their health issue, which is smoking, which should be dealt with education, treatment, and counseling.
All right, so you've educated us. What do you want us to do now? What
Spread
is
the word.
In closing? Okay, in close, spread the word. Bottom line, spread the word.
Yeah,
Not only spread the word.
Let your politicians know we don't want it.
They have to. There are laws and proposals being introduced across various states and cities as we speak, and the power is in the people that vote. Calling your elected officials and expressing to them the impact that this would have, that you've been informed, and that you want them to vote against it. So we have to be actively involved in this legislative process. Everybody does.
Yeah.
Right.
And just understand if you don't completely understand everything as it pertains to this ban, there's one thing you need to know is the O, oversight.
Mhm.
Oversight is not explained in detail. And if you really cover the oversight part of it, there's no way you can have oversight without having some type of law enforcement interaction. So don't let them fool you by saying this ban only has to do with the production of menthol cigarettes. Okay, who's going to do the oversight? The first stop on the federal level is ATF, alcohol and tobacco and firearms. So let's not be bamboozled. Talk to your elected officials. Understand this is dangerous. Understand it puts law enforcement officers in harm's way. It puts our community in harm's way. And I can tell you, most police officers don't want to have anything to do with enforcing laws as it pertains to cigarettes.
It's Elliot Boyce. Elliot's doing his thing with the New York State Police. You got Dr. Ben.
George, I have one
Go
recommendation for you.
Yes.
The tape of this program, we need to send a link to this program to millions of people across the country.
Okay.
This is the most invaluable hour that we've just spent with you, George. And I'm going to applaud you for your public service because you're giving people, your listeners, some vital information that may, in fact, save somebody's life.
Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., President and CEO of the National Newspaper Publicists Association. Court PEGUES, retired NYPD Deputy Inspector Anthony Miranda, National Latino Officers Association, and retired Deputy Chief of the Rochester Police Department, Wayne Harris, and of course, Elliot Boyce, New York State Police. Thank you, Elliot, for your assistance in helping us put this together. And for the community, we've heard from law enforcement, we've heard from, one of the bad civil rights leaders in the country, this issue and how it's going to affect us. Now we have the information. Now it's on us to do what we think is right for our communities and for our children. I'm George Kirkpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation.